We have a lot of exciting content to cover today. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Navigating the Benefit Cliffs of Guaranteed Income Pilots. My name is Matt Lyons. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the American Public Human Services Association, and I will be your guide for today. I'm going to pull up my screen, and we will get started. For those of you who are joining that may be unfamiliar with APHSA, today's APHSA is a bipartisan membership association representing state and local human services agencies. Through our work, we engage both with cabinet-appointed executives that lead human services agencies and their subject matter experts that are responsible for human services programs and operations. On behalf of our members, we aim to influence policies and practices, build capacity in the field, and connect human services and related systems to achieve greater collective impact. And before we get started today, I just want to go over a few logistics. We have a lot of content to share with you, but we are going to make it a point to reserve plenty of time for questions and answers from you all, the audience, towards the end of the session. Please feel free to enter any questions that you have using the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will address them when we get to that segment of the session. Also, today's webinar is being recorded, and all registrants are going to receive a copy of the recording, the slide deck, and any resources included in the next couple of days. We are incredibly thrilled to have a number of subject matter experts and leaders in the field joining us today. 5 speakers across 4 organizations. Today we are joined by Alex Reuter, who is the Principal Advisor for Community and Economic Development with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Kate Garvey, the Director of the City of Alexandria, Department of Community and Human Services. Jacob Dumez, the Manager of Policy and Partnerships for San Francisco's Office of Financial Empowerment, as well as Kat Yang, Acting Director of CalFresh and Nutrition Branch, as well as Jennifer Hernandez, Deputy Director of Family Engagement and Empowerment with the California Department of Social Services. And each one of them will be sharing with you their own perspectives and lessons learned from their work on guaranteed income pilots. So before we turn it over to our esteemed speakers, I did want to take a few minutes to kind of lay down some foundational knowledge and information for why we gathered today, and the information we're going to be going into better detail through the lessons learned in the field that these speakers are all coming to share. So for those of you that perhaps might be newer to guaranteed income pilots, these pilots provide continuous unconditional cash transfers to households. They may be privately funded. Increasingly, we are seeing more publicly funded efforts through both localities and states, particularly with American Rescue Plan dollars, providing new opportunities for governments interested in investing strategically in guaranteed income initiatives. And at their core, guaranteed income pilots differ from the more traditional public assistance programs that are federally funded and that state and local agencies implement, whereas those programs are means tested and often include a range of eligibility requirements. Guaranteed income provides a much more flexible cash transfer model of assisting in anti-poverty approaches. I also want to point out, as you can see on the map, there's been a rapid growth in guaranteed income pilots happening around the country, and there are a number of new pilots that are in process of being adopted throughout the country this year. We're here today for the point of this conversation to talk about how guaranteed income cash transfers can impact eligibility and benefit levels for public assistance programs. And part of the challenge for why we're here is because of the fairly complex maze that both families as well as agencies that are designing guaranteed income pilots have to navigate, given program-specific rules around countable income and how that might impact someone's participation in a guaranteed income pilot. There are a number of different policy levers that may influence, depending on the federal program, how a guaranteed income pilot may influence a public assistance benefit, and with some of those kind of common threads here. And we've included in today's slide deck that we'll share with you all a more program by program overview of how guaranteed income has specifically impacts on some of the most common federal programs where there are potential benefit cliffs that could be created through receipt of guaranteed income. And I won't go through all of these, but just to kind of point out a couple of examples, this is going to differ incredibly state by state. So here, whereas for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or SNAP, you could see that any government source of regular payments, so a publicly funded guaranteed income program, is much more likely to be countable against income absent a federal waiver, whereas there may be more flexibility for states to adopt rules kind of using TANF or Medicaid policies to exempt that if they follow TANF or Medicaid rules. Even looking beyond that, at Medicaid, there's differences between what type of Medicaid recipient, whether it's a recipient being deemed eligible through modified adjusted gross income or non-MAGI, impacts whether an agency may be able to treat a guaranteed income payment as a gift and therefore exemptable from income under IRS rules. There's other programs where it's somewhat more clear cut. So they're for the Supplemental Security Income Program or SSI. GI can not be excluded from income in a pretty black and white manner, whereas we see even more nuances when it comes to various housing subsidy programs, depending on their funding streams and local options, as well as the method of determining eligibility for a program like WIC. So with all of this said, and again, I encourage folks to take a look at these materials afterwards and to reflect on some of the lessons learned from our panelists today. Question is, how do you navigate these issues and to develop a strategy to work in partnership to have GI programs and public assistance programs complementary to each other in supporting families in their path out of poverty? And to get us started today, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists who are going to talk about some of the tools, strategies, and insights that we have in navigating these issues. And I'm going to start off by turning it to Alex Reuter with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you, everyone. It's a great honor to be here today with this panel of experts to talk about this very important issue. My comments today are based on benefits cliffs in guaranteed income programs, and I'm going to be talking about some of the tools that the Atlanta Fed provides at no cost to guaranteed income partners to navigate the benefits cliff. And I think this terminology, navigation, is very appropriate because as you'll hear in today's panel, that navigation involves managing federal, state, and local partners and public assistance programs, waiver development, even legislative efforts, understanding a target population of a guaranteed income program and the experiences they have on public assistance, what their fears or concerns are about public assistance, and then, of course, even managing the local nonprofit network and understanding how that community can support a guaranteed income program. So in the context of that broad navigation, all these different elements, one common thread I would suggest is analysis. Understanding the complexity of these programs locally for both policy, programmatic, and families is where the Atlanta Fed can support this work. And that's what I'll be talking about today. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of context that I'm sure you'll hear again and again today about why the benefits cliff is not only an important issue more broadly, but certainly within the context of the success of guaranteed income programs. Now, one of the main goals, if not the main goal of guaranteed income programs, is to increase the financial stability and security of families. Right, that is a primary goal. A major threat to the goal, I would suggest, is what you see on line 2 of this slide. A barrier to financial stability is the benefits cliff. Some of you, many of you perhaps, have heard of the benefits cliff and how it impacts families as they try to advance in their careers more generally. But as has been recognized for some time now in the context of guaranteed income, particularly as these programs have become more prominent across the country, is how the benefits cliff is going to impact a guaranteed income program. The basic idea of the benefits cliff is, remember, as a family's income goes up, as their assets go up perhaps, they could lose eligibility for key public assistance programs such as food assistance or childcare. Right? Now, if the GI, again, which is intended to increase financial stability, if that GI increases that family's countable income, perhaps if it increases the assets they have, it could trigger that loss in financial assistance through the safety net. If they do lose safety net support, what could happen is that family could actually not benefit as much from the GI as intended, right? Because they're losing, for example, childcare or food assistance, that guaranteed income may not compensate for that loss. So we really have to understand, if the goal of the program is to increase financial stability, what is that interaction with the safety net? Next slide, please. To understand that interaction, not for a variety of different stakeholders, one of the main tools the Atlanta Fed now provides is what we call the Guaranteed Income Dashboard. And that's a collaboration, certainly with the Atlanta Fed and our partners, the National Center for Children in Poverty. Now, the Guaranteed Income Dashboard, if everyone just focuses on the left side of your screen, I want to point out there's a few intended use cases for this tool. Number one, inform policymakers. Let's say some of you are interacting with federal, state, or even local agency officials, and you want to help them understand how the loss of the safety net could impact a GI program. If you want them to understand the context of a waiver request, you could use a tool like this to explain the loss of a safety net in the context of GI. Number two, inform your program design. Let's say you're designing a local GI program. To appropriately design that GI program and other aspects of it, such as a hold harmless fund, you have to have a good sense on what the losses are for your target population. Right? You really need to know that information. What can they lose by that guaranteed income so we could plan to mitigate that loss? And then finally, three, and this is an important one, educate prospective program participants, letting families know about how this GI could impact their loss. Well, why is that important? And I think a recent report from the City and County of San Francisco Treasurer's Office said it very well. Right? It's really about the principles of informed consent to participate in a GI program, and it's about the autonomy and decision-making that families should have. So giving this information facilitates both those goals, autonomy and informed consent. It's very important, I would suggest. The GI tool, which I'll show you in just a second on the right side of your screen, you can see here, is currently available in English and Spanish. It's very much customized to local GI programs, so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And currently it's in use in over 12 guaranteed income pilot programs around the country. I'm loosely using the term over 12 because we have a number of projects in development right now. Next slide, please. The basic setup of the tool is what you see on your screen right now. Now, this is a screenshot of the demo version. It's easily accessible from the Atlanta Fed's Advancing Careers website. If anyone wants to go try out this demo on their own. The basic logic of it is you're going to have a customized menu on the left side of your dashboard, which will be deployed to you over the web. You just would customize it with a few key drop-down menus. Number one, what geography is your program focused on? Is it at the county level, the city level, the state level? Number two, what is the household composition of your target population or the individual that's going through a coaching session about the GI? Again, very important. Number three, well, what is the amount of GI that's part of your program? Right now, this tool's set to a $6,000 per year or $500 per month guaranteed income program. And then finally, well, what public assistance programs are the target population receiving? Right now, I have it set to Section 8 housing vouchers, but this could be customized for a variety of different programs. And it's very flexible so that if you have different families in the program on different programs, you could just type that directly into the tool and see what the results would be. Some of our programs have more options customized in the menu, but this is at least the core essential questions we would want to build for a tool for you. Next slide, please. The output is pretty simple, but again, this can be customized. What we're really interested in is the effective value of guaranteed income, right? So let's say we're giving you $6,000. Once we account for the safety net, how much is that $6,000 worth for you? We don't want it to be zero. right? For sure. But how much are you going to be losing through the safety net that takes away from the value of that $6,000? The output is quite simple here. We always would have a table that just describes two things. Again, notice how we have Section 8 housing voucher on this screenshot. The two key values here are the estimated amount that you receive right now. This is a good quality control check that our partners like. In other words, this tool should inspire confidence if the families can see, oh, this is about how much I received for my housing assistance, right? So we first show how much they receive now, and then what the loss will be because of the GI. In this particular case, in this example, it's $600. So not a great loss, $600 for the year. So the $6,000 GI, the effective value for the family is $5,400 per year because of that $600 in housing assistance that's lost. Right? So again, simple setup. We really just want to get to core questions about what programs are you on, what is the effect of that GI amount on that program for you. Next slide, please. Some of our partners have already offered feedback, and I just wanted to put this quote from one of our partners, the Bridge Project in New York City. And they offered a quote that's in one of our papers now that talks about using this tool in the pilot onboarding process, so directly with families. So quote, "The calculator was extremely helpful for our onboarding process and essentially the only way that we were able to give our mothers any insight into the impact of our program may have on their public benefits." So again, the key word to me at least is insight, going back to those, I would say, goals of informed consent and autonomy in decision making. So the tool gave the mothers the insight they needed to make that informed decision. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I just want to say for 2022 and beyond, the Atlanta Fed, through our Advancing Careers initiative, will continue to develop and improve and support these tools for our guaranteed income partners. It is provided at no cost to any guaranteed income program in the country that wants to work with a tool like this. We will work with you over a planning period, customize the tool. Typically takes us about 3 weeks to offer you a first version of the tool for your feedback. However, we do typically require a very short MOU just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of planning for your program. There's a couple links in this, one link, excuse me, in the slide deck that I recommend you read. We have a 2-page white paper on the guaranteed income dashboard available on our website, and it will talk about the use cases I just went through in this slide deck in a little bit more detail. Feel free to reach out to me or any member of the Atlanta Fed's Advancing Careers team if you're interested in using this tool, or if you just have questions and you want to maybe have an introductory conversation about how this could potentially support your work. Thank you very much for your time, everyone, and it was great to share this with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was terrific. And I already see in the Q&A, we have a number of folks asking questions and are looking at the website, exploring the tool itself. One, maybe just point of clarification for kind of question and answer, Alex. I know that the tool right now that is available publicly specifically has New York information. For folks, just to reaffirm what you said, for folks that are interested in customizing for their own jurisdiction, would that be a direct conversation with you or your colleagues at the Fed Reserve around developing that tool to be customizable for them?
It would be a direct conversation, yes, with us. We usually just have an introductory, approximately 30-minute call. We ask you some of those basic questions. Who is your target audience? What is the geography of your program? Do you have any waivers in place, or are you seeking to secure waivers? Then we start developing the tool, and we'll come back and have that meeting with you, show you how to use it approximately 3 weeks later. And just one point about that demo tool, just so everyone knows, New York is the only option on the demo tool. It's just meant to give you some idea of the functionality.
Terrific. Thank you, Alex, for that clarification. And to continue the conversation and kind of building off of the kind of knowledge that we have these tools to help inform design and coaching around people's participation in GI programs and how to design those in a way that supports their financial stability. We're really thrilled to have our next speaker, Jacob Dumez, who has been engaged with the city and county of San Francisco on a pilot and has just a treasure trove of insights and lessons learned from their experience. So I'll turn it over to Jacob to walk us through San Francisco's journey.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me today. My name's Jacob Dumais, and Matt, don't worry about it. I get Dumais more often than not, and I'm not bothered by it a bit. And I'm going to do a quick sprint through our experience in San Francisco. Matt, just tell me if you need to pull the plug or I'm going off over a little bit. Why don't we go to the next slide? So the Office of Financial Empowerment, we are housed within the City Treasurer's Office in San Francisco. And as you can see on the screen, we focus on strengthening economic security and mobility for all San Franciscans, primarily working with low-income families. I put some examples of research reports that we've listed there. Over the course of our trajectory, we have focused on access to banking, on financial coaching, on child savings accounts, and other related initiatives in particular, and I hope to link back to this, connecting to bank accounts and financial services expertise, as well as our financial coaching work, have been nice fits for how we've approached guaranteed income. Next slide. So how are we doing on guaranteed income? We had some prior experience before the pandemic, pretty light touch. We had some leadership in our office that was interested, but I think as we've all seen, it's been a pandemic journey that has really exponentially grown the field in terms of the number of pilots, the policy interest, et cetera. So over that time, we've been providing technical assistance and support for individual pilots. And in particular, we look at benefits protections. We also talk about payments and distribution of money, supportive services, and some other kinds of supports and answering questions for folks as we can. There's at least a dozen pilots in San Francisco, probably more, depends exactly how you define that. And it feels like I hear more about that every day, with many more in the Bay Area. So we also staff a guaranteed income advisory group that was established by our board of supervisors. I am working on wrapping up our report and recommendations. So you'll be able to find that on our website, or the Guaranteed Income Advisory Group also has a website where you'll be able to find links, resources, and the report. And we convene a Bay Area guaranteed income group, sort of an informal group of practitioners, experts, and advocates that are pretty on the ground with this. I'll note that in California, there's also sort of a statewide community of practice, and there has been a national community of practice led in part by the Economic Security Project. So there's a lot of ways for people to get plugged into this if you're not already. And I noted the research and advocacy that we've done. I'll come back to some specific research that was noted on public benefits. Next slide. So I have a couple slides in here. I can't do the Will Ferrell Zoolander voice so well, but a couple slides on this, why guaranteed income and what about guaranteed income. I'm not really going to walk through these right now, but I wanted to leave them here so when you get the slides circulated, you could at least have those bullets. So next slide, again, more about why guaranteed income and what it is. And we'll skip over that for now. Happy to come back with questions. So the Abundant Birth Project is one of the pilots that we worked with. It is where I'm digging in a little bit more today. It is fantastic, and I won't do it as nearly the justice that Dr. Zaya Malawa, who leads this project, or her fantastic staff and their community researchers can do. So I hope you get an opportunity to hear directly from them. This project targets disparities in birth outcomes, really horrible disparities, by the way, for Black and Pacific Islander mamas and their babies. They are providing $1,000 a month for a year, and they start prepartum and go through after the child is born for 150 mothers. They have been onboarding, I'm not sure exactly how many now, but they're going to do this all over phased in over the course of a couple of years. Importantly, they really are led by Black women with deep experience in the community, and they have dug in something that we see as very important for projects to community research and planning. They identified people who are mothers themselves or who were pregnant, are from the communities that are being served, are Black or Pacific Islander. They train them on qualitative and quantitative research strategies. They pay them quite well, I think is $100 an hour in many cases for the work, and did a lot of design sprints and surveying and really have them present at every stage of the project. Next slide. And I think our next slide, is another placeholder. This is a video, so when you get the slides, you'll be able to look at least a little bit of their side of the presentation, but we'll skip over that for now. So to talk more about the benefits journey that we went on, not just with Abundant Birth Project, but I'll reference that in particular. You see here our report, which you can find on our website and is easily Googleable, and I think we'll include the link. I'm going to walk through on this page or two, and I hope you all don't hear my son screaming in the background, but I'll try to stay focused on my end. Some of the things that programs take into consideration when they're looking to understand benefit impacts and how to protect benefits. And so these aren't necessarily in the exact order that programs and pilots take them in, but more or less. Up front, it certainly is important to identify key benefits of interest to the target population. When it came to Abundant Birth Project, we spent some time really running through local, state, federal, really the gamut. But when we talk to other groups, we want to dig in. Is it really SNAP or TANF or Medicaid that you're very focused on? How important may WIC be? Are there SSI interactions, et cetera? And Matt did a great job on the sort of summary slides. We get deeper into it in our research as well. If I fall into using the California specific sort of Medi-Cal, CalFresh, and CalWorks, please excuse me on that. So you want to identify where those most important impacts are. And then we spent a lot of time, particularly on the waiver journey, but also just confirming where might exemptions lie, what policy changes could be put in place, or what might we push for. And I think, upfront, the tax treatment as a gift is really crucial. That's what protects Medi-Cal, Medicaid, and it's what the basis is for a number of other exemptions. We're very confident that the legal advice we have received holds these to be gifts and holds this as non-taxable money, as a gift, as it were. But again, that's where we spent a lot of our time, is just going through that whole path. And then you can also decide to design eligibility criteria to maximize benefit protection. Not everyone's going to spend a lot of time on this, but the examples might be for a very research-heavy project. We have seen people sample out those that they knew to be completely impacted. If they're working with a group of people who they know are going to lose their full benefit and it doesn't do the justice to the project and the people they're serving or the research, you might sample those folks out or have them in a different sort of test group. You might also do some creative things. And for example, the Stockton Seed Project, a prominent pilot, I think, did this, where you offer, when you're, in this case, a lottery-based pilot for different low-income households, when you're making the offer, you are not saying you, John Doe or Jane Doe, are specifically going to be part of this pilot if you agree, but rather say this is open to a member of your household, and it allows them to take into account, let's see, if I get this, it really might be a big ding on my benefits, but it might be that a partner, a spouse, a cousin, whomever is living in my house might be able to take better advantage. And so that's another way to attack that. Next slide. So then there is, and Alex did a great job talking about sort of how tools can assist here, but what do you do up front? Once you understand as much as you can the lay of the land, how do you translate that to the people that you're working with? And so this has been a tough one, right? Because we probably got the most questions, and I talked to people a lot about GI, about what do we do around benefits and benefits counseling. And it was sort of this idea of like, who are the benefits counselors you can connect us to? And maybe I thought initially that was really going to be sure, let's find those benefits counselors. Well, it's not as much of a thing as you might think. The eligibility caseworkers who are working on, SNAP and TANF and certain programs are not really set up to be the kind of hand-holding guidance and advice counsel that we were looking for in these pilots. They're more there to really interpret the rules, and sadly, more often than not, to screen out who is not eligible. So you're talking about caseworkers, social workers, financial coaches, who in some cases have gathered a lot of expertise, in other cases need to kind of pick up, because it's so complex that, for example, our financial coaches, which we have great referral relationships to in pilots, are scared of saying that we're the benefits counselor people. It's just too much knowledge to hold for the range of these whole benefits. And so certainly the tools that the Atlanta Fed have developed are really powerful here. We have not used that yet for our coaching program, and I don't think it's a direct to client. I think Alex acknowledged that kind of tool. There is another nonprofit organization called Leap Fund, which again has been tackling benefit cliffs through an online tool. They mostly focused on the employment scenarios of what happens if I have an opportunity to get a raise, work more hours, et cetera. How does that impact my benefit in my benefit cliff situation. They have begun to turn to working with some GI basic income pilots as well. I will say our financial coaches got trained on that tool and really haven't encountered a lot. Our sample size is small, but there haven't been a lot of people in that employment situation. So guaranteed income is going to be the new final, frontier here. And if you've gone through this work and you have the big lift to kind of really look at the legislative advocacy that it takes, folks in at least a couple of states, and this was attempted in California as well, have looked to pass legislation which more firmly exempts these cash transfers from benefits eligibility determinations. Next slide. So I think this is my last slide, and I'll pause a little bit here to just talk more about what we've learned on this journey. It took us a long time to unravel benefits interactions. It's complex stuff, as you all know far better than me. So we, in the case of the Abundant Birth Project, were able to help them be successful with gaining both CalWORKs and CalFresh, the TANF and SNAP waivers. And I'm not going to go deep into CalWORKs and CalFresh because thank you, CDSS. Thank you to our State Department of Social Services and Jennifer and Katie for stepping in to discuss that. But we were really happy with how, I will say, kudos that they acknowledged this at this Department of Social Services. They were all over it and really developed a process that is workable. I will say, having said that, that other pilots will be challenged with those waivers because in our case, it's really research dependent and it's a high bar. It's an IRB sort of bar that they have to pass. And so we do talk to pilots who say that's just not something we can really contemplate. It's going to cost too much. We don't have the capacity. And really, frankly, we say that's okay. It's not a deep evaluation that every pilot will need. You will just need to really acknowledge to the people you're working with that there could be impacts to that benefit. We can't protect your CalWORKs or your CalFresh necessarily. Tell us if you have a problem, let's work through it with you. Another waiver that Abundant Birth Project has been successful in gaining, and this was really one we didn't think that was on the board at the beginning, was public housing subsidies. So we worked with our local housing authority as well as with HUD to clarify what kind of exemptions we might be able to gain, and found out that actually, and in fact for years, local housing authorities have had the authority through local policy change to waive cash transfers in research-related projects for traditional public housing, that's site-based public housing. So our San Francisco Housing Authority has made that policy change, and you don't have to get a waiver in that case. You just need to notify them, and that is part of the policy. For housing choice vouchers, which for San Francisco is really the bulk of where people are receiving those subsidies, HUD is getting there. There's some Housing Opportunity Modernization Act that unbelievably, I think it's the Act of 2016 that is still being finalized. When that's in place, it'll be the same deal. You can make local policy change. What Abundant Birth Project did is apply through the Housing Authority and gained a HUD waiver. So that city-county collaboration is really important because for the CalWORKs and the SNAP, the CalFresh waivers that we got, it was our San Francisco Human Service Agency that is required to apply. They have the expertise in those benefits. It was huge to work with them. Same as with our housing authority. Same as with a range of local benefits, which I won't fully talk about here. So that collaboration has been really important because a lot of these efforts are nonprofit-led. We do, as has been acknowledged, need ongoing federal reforms. And for anybody who's on the line, who's playing a role, please, please, please put some effort, attention, and focus into doing that as quickly as we can. We really believe that modernizing WIC and in many ways, but certainly to provide greater possibility of exemptions for cash transfers would be great. SSI really disadvantages, again, people with disabilities and an elderly population from there's just no very limited path there. I will note in our research, and thank you to some legal aid folks who pointed this out, if you're entirely government funded, federal, state, or municipality funded, and you are income determinant for your project, there is a path to exempt SSI, and I'm happy to follow up on getting into the weeds of that, but it's pretty narrow. And then again, non-MAGI Medicaid reemphasizes the sort of age and disability problems that we encounter in helping people here. I already touched on benefits counseling, but again, easier said than done. People are taking a range of different approaches. Some platforms that people are using, Up Together is one. In Compton, the Fund for Guaranteed Income has created a platform to disperse payments. Those platforms may also be used to create communities and resources for people. So in Compton, the choice has been, we're not going to bother doing too much of the benefits advocacy or work up front. We've got a really powerful tool, and thanks, Matt, for the note, that helps people get there, and they will just have enough information to make the choice themselves. So that's what we say to people. We can walk through this, but usually it's us on the government and nonprofit advocacy side that are most concerned about doing no harm. When people find out they have the opportunity to get a $500 or $1,000 a month cash transfer, they usually say, let me figure out the problems. Please do give me that money. And I'll wrap up there, Matt. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacob, for, I think, that really insightful perspective, being a jurisdiction that has experienced the challenges of navigating this issue. And we have a ton of questions that are coming in from the audience. So it's great to see how much this is triggering questions from the group. I'm going to stop my screen share, and we're going to move into a panel discussion phase of the segment. So feel free for the rest of the team to go ahead and turn your cameras on. And we're going to take some questions from the audience, but I do want to start with two quick questions to our panelists. And we've heard at this point from the Fed Reserve as well as a local agency. And I wanted to reach out to Kat and Jennifer from a state agency perspective on particularly how you've navigated the state and federal rules and laws that you face to align policy and guidance in a manner that can be supportive of local GI pilots. So with that in mind, could you talk a little bit about ways you've tried to establish a process and your approach to working with GI pilots, either local or state level, and any lessons learned from that effort?
Thanks, Matt. This is Kat. I'll kick us off and then hand over to Jennifer Hernandez. So what I think the biggest question here is, and I saw that question come through, are there any federal SNAP waivers in place today that excludes GI payments as income for the purposes of SNAP? And so we've been able to identify a federal option that exists today for philanthropic funds. And we are currently engaging in preliminary discussions with USDA FNS regarding whether there is a need to pursue a demonstration project waiver that would allow for the 100% publicly funded GI payments to be excluded as income for SNAP purposes. So those are the two main things that we're exploring. And so and there's two approaches in California. The first approach looks at locally funded GI pilots, which may include philanthropic dollars, public, or a mix of both. And so as I believe Alex mentioned earlier, the first thing to look at is a policy. And so currently, federal SNAP regulations do provide for certain income exclusions for determining SNAP eligibility, including the option for states to exclude certain types of income that the state agency excludes when determining eligibility or benefits for the TANF program. So this is the policy that we as a state opted into. And so each state agency must specify this in their state plan of operations for USDA. And so because we've opted into this, we're able to create a state waiver request process, which includes an income exemption approval requirement, a formal order adopted by the director of the California Department of Social Services. So that process includes, the state waiver request process includes for the interested party to submit, a waiver request cover sheet, a comprehensive plan, a research plan, institutional review board approval if needed. And then once that package gets submitted to us at the state, we review the package, and if approved, we will provide a formal order by the director of CDFS to the entity, and then we're able to go ahead and exempt that income for CalFresh or SNAP purposes. And so that's the first option that we take a look at. But then I think the nuance here too is that we're only able to exempt the publicly funded GI payments, right, for SNAP purposes. And so I'm going to pause there and turn over to Jennifer to speak a little bit more about the second approach, the state-funded GI pilot, and or add anything else to the local.
Awesome. So our state effort includes an investment of $35 million over 5 years. We are looking to fund counties, local municipalities, tribal governments, and other nonprofit partners in helping them establish a guaranteed income pilot. And in terms of where we are in the process, we will be releasing a request for applications in the next few weeks, early this year. And one key component is what Alex and others have spoken to, and that is that we do require, as part of our project, for benefits counseling, right? Wanting to make sure that folks understand what it means if they do opt in to participate in a particular pilot. Our program is set up that in such a way that it does require matching funds. Our hope is that folks are gonna think about sort of what we have learned so far in the process and try to solicit philanthropic dollars to create more flexibilities so that we may exempt that income. And there is a rigorous evaluation component to our effort. Obviously, this size of investment, a statewide opportunity to do these pilots, it's important that we evaluate and sort of learn from the experience and help support the evaluation efforts at the local level. In terms of our conversations on exemption for the pilots and particularly with SNAP, we have been engaging with FNS, USDA, and we've been receiving technical assistance. However, we're still in the process of exploring what a demonstration project waiver would look like, given that each pilot would look differently given their funding structure. And that is the case for almost every pilot we've seen in California. And we are also continuing to explore the issues of cost neutrality and, again, further developing what our evaluation would look like. Back to you, Matt.
Before I hand it over back to Matt, I just want to do one point of clarification. I misspoke earlier. So for when we're utilizing the TANF rule for SNAP, the GI payments must come from a private source to be excluded. So if an approved GI project or pilot is both privately and publicly funded, then the private funding must cover the cost of all payments received by the SNAP households participating. So just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Thanks, Kat, and thank you, Jennifer. It's great to see all the work that California is proactively doing to support GI pilots. And I want to turn it over to Kate and Alexandria. And Kate, you can probably appreciate more than most, like how overwhelming this is to take in, and all the different factors to consider, as you are fairly new in your process of designing a GI pilot, as I understand it. So I'd be curious just to get your perspective and kind of reflections from what you've heard, and questions, challenges, strategies that you're deploying in Alexandria to move your work forward and tackle these benefit cliffs.
Thanks so much, Matt. And other than moving to California and accessing all those wonderful resources, what is really profound to me, and this today represents it also, is the level of commitment and interest in this, and the willingness of all those who've been clearing the pathway to help all of us who are coming behind them. Our team has met with so many different pilots across the country. People have been so generous with their time to help with lessons learned. And, I think one of the amazing pieces of these projects are that they do reflect the interest of each community, which they should. On one level, let it be responsive to the community. On the other, we need stronger federal support and broader, support across the board. And we went through a process within Alexandria, listening directly to our residents to say, what do you want this to look like? And to talk to potential participants to say, what's helpful, what's not. And in just listening to Jacob too, we learned so much during the pandemic. We had a project that was focused on giving grocery gift cards. That was the closest we could come at that, at that juncture, using CARES dollars. And we saw what a profound impact that had, and felt strongly we can do better, we can give more. And then seeing what was happening across the landscape, The other thing that's been so critical is the partnerships. We have the support of our local community foundation and local foundations, as well as other partners, really helping us to think through how can this be done, how can we evaluate this appropriately, and recognizing that if we don't solve the issue related to the impact on the benefits cliff, our outcomes are going to be much more limited. And so I think there's so much that's possible. We feel strongly, and I absolutely agree that families say, I know how to spend money. I know what I need and I will go and get it. I don't need you to tell me what and when and where. And again, this is something that we need to learn, as public entities, as those who are responsible for supporting individuals in their economic processes, to learn from that, because it's true and it's been proven out multiple times. So how do we look at building something that is reflective of what individuals and families are trying to accomplish in their own economic security? And then how do we get out of the way or support and sustain what they're trying to do? The other component from my perspective, and I heard, Jacob talked about the council. We're calling ours an economic, prosperity council, where we're looking at this project. We need support in managing this project, but it's much more than that. What are the other overarching barriers to people's economic security, particularly in communities like a San Francisco or an Alexandria, where the disparities of wealth are so profound? And how are we really looking at all the other components that are barriers to people moving forward? And again, there's so much generosity of thinking, so much creativity. And again, how do we take this and really move it toward policy change if our commitment is for people to be able to move onto the pathways that they want? How do we use this information? And I'm so thrilled to hear the progressive nature, in California, and putting your money where your mouth is, to make it happen. And how do we do this, on a much broader level and on the federal level? And how do we use what we've learned to change our systems? And that's part of what our research is going to be. What do we see? What do we so obviously see that is more beneficial about how this is being done than how we currently deliver our services and our supports?
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Kate. That's great to hear. So we have a lot of questions, and I see that our panelists are actively trying to respond to all of the individual ones that we can as we go through it. And we're going to make a point to try to address any questions that we're unable to get to today and follow up with you all individually that are asking questions. But I'm seeing some trends here, kind of both some questions about some of the kind of nuanced details of kind of program specific or design considerations for setting up GI, as well as some of the broader types of changes that we need to be talking about around policies at the federal level. But maybe I'll start with kind of highlighting some questions that I'm seeing in the chat or in the Q&A around, specifically, I was seeing questions around this kind of idea of gifts and treating GI payments as gifts and how that can be used to help mitigate the cliff effect for at least some programs. And not to pick on Jacob, but I know that this has been a part of some of the strategy that San Francisco's deployed in their support of pilots. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your experience there.
Yes, happy to. So I was trying to flip to, and offline I can try to help people with this. So folks have mentioned the general welfare exclusion of the IRS, which comes into play here. I don't see it as necessarily two different paths. Like, are you trying to get gifts or are you trying to get general welfare? I think it's part of the same kind of exclusionary packet to be saying that this is not income, this is gift per IRS. But essentially, I think the guidelines that we've gotten, and in San Francisco, we have city attorneys who look at this stuff, but we also went and retained outside counsel on this issue and came back with a ruling. I can't just share that ruling. It hasn't been directly shared with me, in fact. But some of the broad strokes of it, we tried to include in our protecting benefits brief. But essentially, I think that some of the key things were whether it's from government or a private source, and sometimes there's some commingling, right? Even if it's all private monies, do you have government salaried employees who are providing these direct services? It's hard to determine. But whether it's coming from any of those sources, the attorneys we've spoken with are fairly confident that this is not countable as income per IRS. What you have to watch out for is that it's a sort of a disinterested general welfare approach. And that's what a lot of government does, right? First of all, we're out to do the public good. So we're not giving it to people to make friends or score points or something like that. It's to help communities. And then another thing would be, and this could be a tricky one for some pilots, is that you can't give money as a condition of work that has been completed or some other program you're part of. So we see programs that are like, well, we're doing a workforce program. What about a stipend for people in the workforce program? And it becomes a little touchy. I'm not going to say which end of the line it's on, but it looks like a condition of being part of that project. Or they're doing some sort of form of work, and maybe it's volunteer work, but they're doing something on behalf of the nonprofit or the pilot, and we're giving them money on top of that. Well, that becomes a tricky issue either. It really has to be unrestricted, unconditional funds. Well, the last piece I'd add is people are saying, well, how can we clarify that? And I think the field needs some of that. We've talked to some like very high-powered law firms that retain partners who have the direct experience working for the IRS and working with tax issues all across the board. They're some of the ones who are saying we feel confident about this. We're hoping that we can help them connect with a pro or low bono client, maybe request an opinion letter from the IRS and make that a sort of a broader, rather than pilot by pilot, state by state, here is the general opinion letter we have gotten on this. We're not there yet, but I think that would be a great next step.
Awesome. Thanks for helping us unpack that, Jacob. I want to turn to more kind of a practice piece of this. And I saw a question come through around kind of given all of these issues that we're trying to unpack, like the folks are interested in thinking about more like what does informed consent look like? I know Jacob talked about that a little bit in his remarks, and some of the tools that Alex in the Fed Reserve is developing to help create a pathway to have those conversations. But I wanted to kind of ask the panel about, in the context of these very difficult and tangled issues to be communicating and planning around, when it comes to engaging people and families that are considering participation, kind of how do you see this playing out in the strategies that you're looking at to ensure that there's informed consent and considering these decision points? And I know, Kate, don't pick on you, but you're probably at the kind of in the middle of some of these conversations. So can we pick your brain a little bit and see how you're thinking about this?
Sure, we really do. And it's, I think, related to something that Jacob also mentioned, that having coaches and others to really support benefits counseling. So people are making a decision with full information to say, here, these are the consequences, or these are the things that may happen if we go down this pathway. In addition, what we are trying to pursue is the creation of a hold harmless fund that would also support individuals in the event that they would lose part of their benefits, so that would be something that could make the decision easier. That's a costly strategy, but one we think is important. But it really is about upfront, before people make the commitment, if it's through the lottery process, before they get in, to say, here's what's before us. It is your choice and your decision, and then to move forward. And I think that piece is a really important one.
Thanks, Kate. Alex, from a more macro perspective, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, sure thing. One of the reasons I personally liked the informed consent terminology is, just simply my personal background from the university system, and a principle of any work with a family or either research or any other direct interaction with a participant is informed consent. And that means that the family knows the benefits, the risks, and very transparently, well, what is this program I'm signing up for? to truly know the risks, even if it ultimately is not a concern for the family. I think having the transparent conversation about the public assistance potential losses is very important, because otherwise you're not honoring the value of informed consent and autonomy in decision making, which I think is an important usage of these tools. Even if, again, the families are like, that's great, now I know, I'm going ahead. This program is right for me. I'm gonna accept it. They're informed, right? They've been informed about the risk, and they've made that personal autonomous decision to proceed. I think that's an important goal.
Matt, I might
Go ahead, Jacob.
just chime in. I know people want some of the specifics. I think we can find pilots and help connect people with the actual letters, right? I think people are willing to share and help each other out on this. At its fundamental part, there's some letter that's going to read that says, congratulations. Maybe they have a chart of benefits and likely impacts, right? And they say, use words like likely or could instead of knowing exactly. But you try to outline what we know, and then you have people sign off. And it's some protection, but I think people are less concerned about legal protection than just having the knowledge out there. So it's the letter, then it's, as Kate said, a person to translate that into real talk. And at the end of the day, I think I would also answer some of these questions as saying people have a lot of focus on this, but the hold harmless funds that have been created are very underutilized, surprisingly. And part of that is people are just more disconnected from benefits. Oh, what benefits are you going to lose? Well, I'm not really getting these benefits right now. And we're surprised because in many cases you should. And so that's part of the broader problem of expanding and strengthening access to these benefits. We're working on the transgender initiative on a pilot, and then we're like, what benefits are of interest? And they say, honestly, we know the folks who we're working with in San Francisco in this community, and they are very disconnected from the safety net. And so that plays into this as well.
Terrific. Well, I know there's more questions than we're going to be able to get to today, but we are capturing everything that we've received, and we'll be making sure to follow up with on any points that we haven't been able to close the loop on. I want to reinforce that we are going to be sharing all the resources that were provided today in a follow-up email that will go out to you all, as well as the slide materials. And I want to just thank our panel for one, just doing this work and being the folks that are helping to figure it out and kind of lay out a landscape for others to be successful in supporting families that are participating in these pilots. And I want to thank you all again for joining us today. And we're looking forward to continuing to support these conversations going forward. So thank you all for joining, and we'll be continuing the conversation.